Groeien met groen staal is onderdeel van het Groeifonds. In deze Engels gesproken aflevering praten we met Mar Pérez-Fortes en Jenny Lieu, beide hoogleraren aan de TU Delft. Met hen praten we over hoe we zorgen dat de complexe staalwereld in Nederland de juiste beslissingen kan maken voor groen staal in de toekomst. Deze aflevering is begin november live opgenomen op de Groeien met groen staal Consortium Meeting in Ede. Enjoy listening to this episode.
Mar, Jenny, welcome to the show. Yeah, and we have some more people here. This is a special episode. We are recording live at the GGS event. So we also have an audience. Audience? Thank you, audience. So the podcast always starts with the same question. So we'll do that today as well. And that is, what is your personal connection to green steel? So Jenny, if you would like to kick off.
Yeah, it started in the summer, hot summer Netherlands, if you can imagine that, of 2022. And Mar and her colleague, Andrea, invited me to a workshop in Tata Steel. They said, we're looking at decarbonization in the steel sector. It's not just a technical problem, but also a social science problem. And my work looks at decarbonization and transformations in coal and carbon-intensive regions, so that was a really nice collaboration.
Mm-hmm. So yes, of course, in that aspect, also the same colleague, Andrea, was the one that introduced me also to this green steel project. And then both of us, Andrea and I, we share the same expertise, so in chemical engineering, process system engineering, and of course, being, let's say, in this field of designing new processes for many years, it was a unique occasion to work with such a, let's say, initiative where many people from different, let's say, backgrounds, different stakeholders collaborating all together for one purpose was being put in place. Yeah.
Nice. There are different terms for green steel, right? We can talk about green steel, low carbon steel. Jenny, could you maybe give us the definition that when we talk about green steel today, what's the definition that we will be talking about?
Yeah, there isn't an agreed definition of what green steel is, but within our consortium, we roughly consider green steel or low carbon steel as either the energy systems or the energy used to produce steel is via renewables, and as well as considering the recycling material, so increase in recycling materials. So these are the two core components that our consortium looks at. A third component is also looking at carbon capture and storage and use, and that's something that is not as central to what we're looking at. But generally, this is our understanding of what green or low carbon steel is.
Yeah.
So if I can add to that also, because within our theme, within the theme one also, we are looking at and collaborating also with other themes to have a specific definition. We don't have it yet, but there is also a standardized tool which is called life cycle assessment. So there we are also exploring. In fact, when we say green steel or low carbon steel, of course, you need to compare with the status quo. So then to say, look, with these features, and as Jenny pinpointed, use at least of renewable electricity, increasing the use of scrap, recycling, etc. So at least this has to be there, but we need to be sure that overall the whole process is greener or has low carbon emissions when compared to the status quo.
Yes.
Yep.
And to move the world towards the adoption of and use of green steel, we need a system change. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But maybe not everybody listening to the podcast understands the word system. So maybe what is a system?
Yeah, so I can start. Yes, so then a system, so theoretically we can say that a system is a group of components that all of abstract it can be physical or abstract components that all of them work with a common purpose. So then when we talk different, let's say, backgrounds, and here we are in the consortium, of course, we come from multiple disciplines, so you can talk about system and we refer to different things, and it's true. So we can have systems that are at micro level or at macro level, right? So it can be anything that has these components working for the common purpose. But here, in theme one, system change, we take the most comprehensive point of view we can. So then we start also starting with the plant level, which will incorporate, elements from more, fundamental research, plant level, value chain level or supply chain level, taking into account other factors affecting this, steel production, and moreover we have the context level, layer. Understanding this, putting together many social elements, governance elements, and all the elements that we can, include that could make the steel process, the green steel process feasible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a system is useful for helping us to study because this is a conceptual boundary. How do we begin to study a steel sector? First, within the Netherlands, we look at the inputs and outputs that's required within the value chain. But beyond the inputs and outputs and all of the organizations involved in the consumer and end users, we're also considering the policymakers and the policies that can influence the system. But we need to draw a boundary. So if the system is all things related to steel, the outputs and the uses of steels, including the policies and regulations that could impact it, outside of that system, we look at the contextual level. So politics that are maybe outside, that might influence the system.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like a really large system. So what are the main stakeholders then?
Yep. So as main stakeholders, that's our question. So this is something also that we want to answer in the theme research, right? Because of course we can pinpoint all the stakeholders. So regarding, since let's say the mineral extraction until steel use and recycling, right? Mm-hmm. So all of them are there, but also part of our work is to identify where is the critical path, right? So what are those stakeholders that that possibly has more influence than others in this transition? Yeah.
Yeah, and all of those, I think most of those core stakeholders are within the GGS Consortium. Yes. So you also see those who are looking at the materials and the research component, the steel makers themselves, the consumers of the steel makers. What we don't have in the consortium is the representative for societal stakeholders. So those societal stakeholders are also part of the system, but may or may not be directly involved. So let's say the communities that are close to the steelmaking sites, those stakeholders are quite key, though they might not be seen as the inputs within the system.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so societal does not mean governmental. Societal means groups within society.
Yes, that's how I would understand it, yeah.
No. And how do we enable this large, because we need a large change, right? This is a big one. So how do we enable this big change, Mar? How do we go about this?
Yeah, well, that's a bit that's what we try to to answer or to enable right at the end of our research in theme 1. So the methodology we put together, so it's a multidisciplinary theme. Mm-hmm. So then what we aim at is to, with different, let's say, methodologies from different disciplines, quantitative and qualitative methodologies, we really want to enable this change with information. So what we do in theme 1 is to really, of course, collect information, have our own modeling, processing, etc., and then come up with different alternatives that could enable this transition, which we need to remember that is not just a transition of the steel, let's say, sector, mm-hmm. It is a transition of the whole society, right? So then how can we do that? So at least how we face it is to develop all these tools to really show, what could be different decisions that could be made to really help on this transition.
Okay. Can you give a few slightly more practical examples?
So, for instance, what we could do, so for instance, at the plant level, right? There should be, let's say, an understanding what could be, because particularly we are working here, of course, in the Netherlands, so it's not a steel plant. So what could be a good combination of the different technologies that are being now tested, right? So what we could do within our modeling work, within our theme, is to analyze, yes, because of course, based on the experimental data we are having, based on the experience gained within and outside the consortium, we could, let's say, look, with all these alternatives, this could be optimal optimal, or this could be more feasible in this aspect, environmental aspect, economical aspect, or societal aspect. And then we can provide all this information for finally the stakeholders make a choice. Yeah.
So within the GGS Consortium, we might have one technology that we select that makes steel making more sustainable, so electric furnace. So a lot of our partners are looking at the materials that are required, because when you change the blast furnace system, the environment also changes. So a huge part of this is the technical change that's required. Aside from the technical, let's assume that everything works. We have to assume that there's enough clean energy that feeds into the system.
Yeah.
And that means that the infrastructure, which is not yet built, will be built somehow. And so then, therefore, you also need the support from the government. And what we've seen last month is within the agreement that the government has with Tata, this is a huge signal to the market and say, we're taking green steel seriously. And that means that also companies need to want to invest in clean energy, for instance, hydrogen. And society, consumers, also have to accept using, let's say, recycled steel material. Mm-hmm. And does that mean that my product will be lower quality, or would be the same quality? Would it be the same safety standard when we have recycled steel material in car? So this is a really three-pronged approach, is both the technology development, government top-down support in terms of policies, providing grants or promoting clean energy, and as well as a kind of consumer and behavioral change.
Yes, yes.
So how do you research that when there are so many options? I mean, the options are endless, the possibilities.
My simple answer is ask the PhDs. They're looking at the details. Yeah, I mean, that's why we have 90-something PhD projects. There's so many different levers that we're looking at. So one area is to look at what are the possible futures. Mm-hmm. And different groups have different futures. So the GGS envisions a future with green steel within the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. So what are the components are needed? Again, we have a number of partners, and I think majority focus on the technical component from the atomic level, making sure that the materials and the system is there and that it functions at the factory level, but also at the value chain level, that the say, key consumers of the green steel are part of the discussion. Mm-hmm. So it's this co-development of like, what technologies are we using? How does it input the steel output? So there isn't the one answer that can say that, yes, green steel will happen if this technology works, but the technology is also dependent on a wider system.
Yeah. So if I can add to that, so as Jenny said, of course, the PhD students, we have now at the beginning this phase where they have to choose and narrow down the decision space of the space of possibilities. But also we have also one of the characteristics of the consortium is that many stakeholders are present, of course, representative of the different stakeholders, value chain stages are present here. So then we also expect to have this dialogue, this valorization, and this let's say, continuous feedback and providing of results, etc., to have a path that, let's say, is coherent with where, let's say, all of us are going to. Yeah.
And when we spoke just before the podcast, Jenny, you were talking about scenarios that you are running. Can you explain a little bit more about how that works?
Okay, scenarios are visions of what the future looks like.
Yes.
So all of the consortium partners within Green Steel sees a vision that green steel is going to be part of the future. So that includes, as I mentioned earlier, having the technology, selecting one or two core technologies that are at the marketable stage, and also looking at the entire value chain. Do we have the inputs, for instance, scrap steel? Where would the inputs come from? Within Netherlands, Europe, outside of Netherlands, and also the steel makers themselves are essential to adopting this technology. And then, of course, we have the end users, which could be also businesses that would essentially be using it. And this vision would see the steel sector becoming green, increase in recycled or scrap material, as well as with a clean energy system. So that component is a big assumption that we have. We will have a hydrogen backbone that is able to provide enough electricity for Tata Steel as well as for the other industries. That's one scenario. One scenario that we also need to acknowledge is, let's say, the communities that are living close to the factories, and they just don't want a factory nearby. They're tired of it. So they may see a future that there is no steel making in the Netherlands. And that's a reality that we need to cope with and to consider that. That's one stakeholder's reality. How do we reconcile these contradicting scenarios?
Mm-hmm. So if I can add to what Jenny said, so she put different examples, and then possibly we can say that in these scenarios we can look at three different, let's say, levels, like governance of policy, society, and then all the related market with the steel sector, right? So then what Jenny is saying, so eventually we can assume in these scenarios that all of them are aligned, and then there is a positive, let's say, context to do this transition, right? But if we look at today, there is still a lot to do in the governance, in the market, in society for the implementation of let's say, or for the transition of the green steel, which is not just the transition of the steel sector, but energy sector, industry in general, right? So then, if we look at this, these things have to happen. So then, in this scenario analysis, is a way to analyze, right? To understand, how these factors could interact with each other. And moreover, if we look within each one of these, let's say, of these pillars, we have the stakeholders, right? But not all the stakeholders have the same relevance, possibly for the change. So possibly also one of our, let's say, work is within this scenario analysis, uncertainty analysis, etc., is to pinpoint again these critical people, stakeholders that could make this happen. Yeah.
So what your research does is also pinpoint the things that are absolutely essential for the success. So are there some first results? Are there some first scenarios that have been run already?
Not yet, Jenny. Yes. No. We have been started. You can see. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this is the qualitative analysis of what are the essential components, or maybe sometimes the assumptions that we have that allow the system to work. So as I mentioned earlier, it's the energy system, that we have enough energy there. So for instance, if a steel production factory produces 7 million tons of steel, this is equivalent to 7 million medium-sized cars. That requires 31 terawatt hours of energy per year. That's roughly a quarter of the Dutch energy needs. So if you just really try to think about the scale of transition, it's not about only the steel sector, it's also the energy sector transitions. And the economics also need to make sense. But sometimes economics is not necessarily the driver for transitions. We've seen in other case studies, for instance, in the UK, the nuclear power sector. Generating energy from nuclear power is very expensive. Does it make economic sense? Or is that a strategic position that the country is taking, that we want to ensure that there is a nuclear producing sector? So also the government in Netherlands need to think, is steel sector a critical industry that we want to support onto the future, that are inputs to many of other sectors, so it's not one decision making alone. So this is also where the policy agenda, and I think that might be interesting to see what the government might be supporting in the next few years.
And what stakeholders that you have mentioned are actively participating in these scenarios?
We haven't yet had a co-creation of narratives. So our ambition for next year, I'm so excited, I'm just bumping into this microphone. It's a really exciting topic. We want to have the key stakeholders that are involved, which are promoting or want the steel sector to occur, and others that might be maybe in the middle or maybe even wanting it not to try to state what is your vision of what the future looks like. So this will be a combination of steel producers, steel end users. So we're starting with our GGS Consortium. Then where possible, it may not be all in the same room, it might be in a focus group speaking to politicians or those representing policy agendas. It's really difficult to make an appointment with the head of state. And so with this co-creation development of what the scenario looks like, then we can begin to model what is a potential outcome. Not saying that the future has to look like this, but what could it look like?
Yeah. And what we have already started to do is that, for instance, we have already some PhD students have started. So these conversations of the PhD students within them, of course, because in our theme, we need to collaborate between the different layers that we mentioned before. So the plan, the value chain, and the context level. So conversation within them, within the consortium. So that has been done. And then now, of course, as Jenny was saying, it's not just a conversation inside the consortium, which is already very valuable because many actors are already here, but also outside. Yeah.
And what are some of the external factors that are impacting the research, I guess? I mean, we have changing governments, we have a very interesting geopolitical situation. So what are the big influences outside of the stakeholders?
Yeah. So as you said, so we can say, of course, geopolitics are important. Resources are important. So it's also what we were saying before. So the availability of at least maybe hydrogen is also important. So are we going to import, produce the hydrogen within the boundaries of our, system, or is something that would come, we buy this hydrogen? Also electricity, as Jenny was saying, so generation of renewable electricity, or at least not carbon-intense electricity. So these are many factors that play a role, and also competitors, of course, on the steel producing market, and not only steel, but also scrap recycling. So many other factors that could be mentioned. So now there is, of course, this is not a system which is isolated. So as you said, it's very important to take into account all these external factors. But for instance, for the steel sector, I would say for the importance of indeed the transformation of the sector. If I need to say main sectors that need to be developed also together, of course, with the green steel sector, of course, is the hydrogen generation, renewable electricity, possibly biomass also availability, so biomass, market, and geopolitics, of course. Yeah.
So, Jenny, what would you say is absolutely essential looking at the scenarios that you will research?
I say one essential part, aside from the assumption that the technology will work, which we work with that assumption, is a clean energy system and a pricing that makes sense for investments within the energy sector, so the renewable energy sector, and hydrogen either produced within Netherlands or imported from abroad. Mm-hmm. And that needs policy support, because right now the appetite for investment in hydrogen is really low, and actually players are opting out, and we're turning from green hydrogen to gray hydrogen. So we really need to get that piece of the puzzle really affordable, as well as to ensure that it's actually green.
Mm-hmm. So if I can also contribute to that, so I would say also from the theme one perspective, one essential thing would be to have this alignment between stakeholders. So maybe at the beginning we start with some ideas, how this transition need to happen, but only after all this alignment between all the actors, alignment and of course, negotiations possibly between the different options, so to have this critical mass of actors that are, let's say, compromised to move towards, let's say, the change of the sector. Yeah.
So what is your message to stakeholders, your message to get them to enable this system change we need?
So I would say to keep the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So to be open to, of course, to maybe to accept that maybe let's say that in order to move the whole sector, all of us together, maybe the compromise solution would be in the middle. So I would say that, and one of the theme, let's say, objectives is to have this critical mass by 2031 when the program finishes. I would say to be open for conversations. Yeah.
And I would say to be daring in terms of using new technologies, as we see with the steel producers, daring in investing in renewable energy and knowing that the market is there, and also daring to see a future where we all work together. So I think it's really pushing the ambition forward and spreading that narrative or scenario of what a green steel future looks like in Netherlands.
Great, being open and being daring. Daring. Yes. Well, thank you both for explaining what a system is to start with, but also explaining more about system change and how we are going to enable it by being open and daring. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, audience. I think we have time left for questions.
Yes.
So does anybody have a question? Yeah, so I'll repeat the question because you're not on the mic. So you're saying the Dutch steelmaking ecosystem, there are a lot of challenges, and your question to the ladies is, what are the main strengths and weaknesses of the system, and what's the vision moving forward?
So I had a discussion with PhD Yusuf Derry. Yeah, thank you. And one thing that's very specific about the Dutch steel sector that Yusuf mentioned is the specialized components and the high quality steel. So it's not going to be the cheapest here, but it's specifically produced for end user products. And so there is already this path dependency, and this is one element that makes it's an additional value added. Another thing that Yusuf brought up was also the changing geopolitical climate and the need to perhaps produce specialized equipment within Netherlands, not just within Europe, but within Netherlands. So looking at the changing power dynamics around the world, the allies that we used to depend on are shifting. So it's looking a bit more internally and to try to strengthen that. So these are not necessarily economic. So one is political and one is a kind of specialized high quality steel for particular consumer base, not only in Netherlands but worldwide. So those I would say would be the strengths.
Yes. I agree with Jenny, and also indeed being in Europe, right? At the end of the day, these regulations or this framework is also moving towards this, decarbonization of the industry in general. And then Jenny, as let's say weaknesses.
Should I highlight again? Energy system and lack of policy support. So while there is this rhetoric that we need to have a strong industrial sector, and funding this consortium itself is also a huge signal in saying that this is of strategic importance. But we need specific policies that look at the whole supply chain, that looks at the inputs and outputs. What's going to incentivize a higher cost energy system? So we've seen this in other sectors. We need the policies, specific policies, and discussion within the government as well as the energy producers, and signals to the markets this is investment that is needed. So I would say that is one of the greatest weaknesses or risks. Challenges. Yeah, yes. I wouldn't say it's a weakness yet.
And also, let's say public opinion, right? So, but also in general, in the whole Europe. So this is also important, so to discuss with the public. And not only, of course, it's a discussion on the public, because of course, industry, what does it mean industry in general, right? So it's, is amount of work, development, products. So it still is also a product, is indeed a product that it needs to be, of course, produced. It's not something that we can replace with something else, renewable and another option, but it's a process that needs to keep going. So I guess this communication with society, which is my possibility, sometimes is not that favorable to, of course, to heavy industry processes, needs to be there, right? So.
And a part of it is the Dutch governance system, in that the government doesn't tell you what to do. They fund instead a consortium and say, you tell us what you want to do, and here's a lot of money, so they throw it at you, which means that there's an openness and a willingness, but also recognition that is not just funding one factory or one company, but it's the whole system. So I think maybe a strength is the innovation system, education as well.
Yes, and motivating this collaboration at the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. This dialogue between the stakeholders and this collaboration, and then possibly within all these, let's say, discussions, the best solution, right, could pop up. Yeah.
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
And a short answer.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, so I think you two should start a podcast together. This is. At times I'm wondering what I'm even doing here. You're just doing a great job. So the question is if there are techniques being developed to enable the flow of information and communication between all the stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. So Jenny, I can start. Yes. So that's indeed a good question, and there are possibly I can say two paths. So one, of course, is the effort that the consortium does for this. So, for instance, the podcast. So to talk to more, let's say, public, so general public. So there are also newsletters, and we keep discussing in the consortium, of course, what are the best ways to communicate, to keep communicating, and to keep the interest of the general public, maybe also educators, right? So different communities of what is happening within the consortium, right? So to spread the voice. But also we have particularly within Theme 1, of course, we also have the challenge to discuss with all the stakeholders within the consortium and also with stakeholders outside, right? So then it's also a challenge for us with all these disciplines to make each other understood. So then it's part of our theme indeed to make us understood and to come up with setups that make, let's say, messages pass by through different, let's say, people from different disciplines, from different backgrounds. So, yeah, so long story short is indeed we work on this from the consortium part and also from the Theme 1 part, let's say, with the idea of, let's say, communicate and have these discussions between the theme and the stakeholders.
Yeah. And for specific examples, please see our PhDs because they are operationalizing this, so development narratives, qualitative scenarios, using transdisciplinary methodologies. So we are applying methodologies from social science and other fields. So that would be my quick answer. Speak to the PhDs, they know a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those questions. And it's been very interesting to discuss, a Dutch system change with somebody from Canada and somebody from Spain, which actually speaks to the international nature of this consortium and the fact that it's not just the Netherlands, the whole world needs to work together. So thank you, Jenny, muchas gracias, Mar, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Leuk dat je luisterde naar deze aflevering van Groeien met Groen Staal. In de volgende aflevering luisteren naar Deze en Jenny Heiligers, docenten bij het Nova College, over hoe Groeien met Groen Staal ervoor zorgt dat huidige en volgende generaties technici op alle niveaus klaar zijn voor groen staal.